Hi there, and welcome to the Multiply You podcast, where we showcase top experts in their space and reveal all the secrets you need to know to multiply you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Austin Clark here, host of the Multiply You podcast. Really excited to be able to visit with our guest today, Andy. I'll introduce him here in just a moment. We met about 3 minutes ago, and this guy has got so much energy. The first thing that he said to me, I said, hey, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, oh, man, things have been off the rails, since the pandemic, since 2020. We have a lot to talk about, and there's some really neat things that he has done in his company as it relates to culture and some of the things that I was really impressed with that you just shared with me, which we'll get into as we go live here. This podcast and this episode is brought to you by my company, Moxie Pest Control of Arizona. We're growing just like Andy and his company is, just like many of you are. One of the primary ways that we've done that outside of direct mailers and SEO and pay-per-click campaigns and all of the traditional stuff has been via acquisition. We're finding a real niche in that a lot of the big acquirers or big companies aren't really touching companies in the $500,000 to $2 to $3 to $4 million range, but we are. And so if you are interested in golfing more, working less, looking to see what the next chapter of your life looks like, please reach out to me. And you can do that directly on my cell at 480-254-9730. You can also email me directly at clark@moxiepestcontrol.com. And then also I want to let everyone know, if you haven't heard the last few episodes, author Michael E. Gerber and I, the last 2 years, we've been co-authoring the E-Myth Pest Control vertical book for the pest industry. And it's finally done. And he and I together, we're launching it physically together Thursday, November 3rd in the evening in Phoenix. And so I was telling Andy before, we're not inviting the whole world. We want this to be a positive evening for the industry. But if that's something that you're really interested in, or you and a member of your team is really interested in, RSVP with me as quickly as you possibly can on either the cell that I provided before or my email. We'll look forward to having you there and having Michael keynoted and having it be a really, really good thing. Okay, so Andy is the founder and president of Perimetek Pest Management, located in Syracuse, New York. He's worked in the professional pest management industry for 25 plus years and specializes in commercial and food safety spaces. I don't know that we will even get into much of that. I think that we'll probably focus the bulk of our time on culture. But Andy also serves on the board of directors of the NYPMA, or New York Pest Management Association. So he's very involved. He's very giving with this time as far as a servant leader as well. Welcome to the show, Andy. I'm so glad to be able to have you and kind of get this thing on the road.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's go back to the first thing that you told me just a few moments ago, and that was the pandemic was going on. The world was crazy. You said that you stopped doing something right at the very beginning of 2020. What was it, and why did you do that? And what have you done to fill your time with?
Yeah. So, right at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, it wasn't right at the beginning. I watched a bit of news, like everybody, to keep up with what's happening and the changes that were happening there. And for us, it was March 2020. But after a little while, once I realized the world's not going to burn down, we still got to go to work. We're still doing stuff. I gave up news completely. Just went cold turkey. And to this day, I mean, I watch the weather, and that's about it. I don't engage in that. And I found myself with an absolute wealth of time available. And what I did with that time is I started actually reading, like, voraciously. I think I'm on right around 100 books since then that I've done on business and culture and all these sorts of things. And it really stemmed out of a curiosity that I had at the time, where my jumping off point was, when we have larger players in the market that come into a market in pest control, they don't run the little guy out of business. They, like a Walmart comes in, and then your local shoe store is done. They don't last. And I got thinking, why is this the case? How could this be that you would have smaller to mid-sized pest control companies in every market in the country that not just survive against the big players in the market, because they do a great job. They have economies of scale, all this. How come they thrive? How come in a lot of cases, those small to mid-sized companies do really well? I mean, we do really well in our market, and we have big players in the market. And I started to realize that each one of these companies had different strategies. When I would look at different companies, I'd research specific companies in New York, and one in South Carolina, one in Florida. They all had different strategies. They all had different approaches, different marketing. And I started to realize with that there had to be like a structural advantage. There's something about the size, the structure as they're constructed, those smaller companies, that gave them this advantage, because they would have completely different. Some would be all commercial work, all residential work. They do termites, they don't do termites, all over the place. And what I started to realize was that there was an advantage that these smaller companies were realizing in their company culture that they weren't even aware of. I don't think sometimes they were. I think sometimes in a like almost subconscious level, they kind of feel it, and they know. And that's the thing with culture. It's like it's more an emotion than it is a rational use of your brain. But with that, what they were doing was that culture that they could have there, because of its size, would give them specific advantages. And I actually kind of identified 3 points that they would benefit from. One is that cultural dissemination is extremely dense in those small companies. So if you look at like, say, like a family size, you have 5, 6, 7 people. Even when you get into like primitive man, like tribal sizes where you're maybe 20, 50 people, something like that. This is what we're naturally kind of drawn to, as far as that's the size of a group where you can have very, very dense culture where people feel like they belong, and they have a obligation to the other person, where they'll fight and die for that other person. If you get very, very big, that cultural dissemination just isn't as dense. So they had that. The other thing that they were benefited by was that they would accumulate talent. Top talent would stay there for that culture. You would have these small companies would accumulate the best talent in the area over time. You don't have attrition. You don't have people that are leaving, because once they find their way there they are. And I found evidence of this in when you have acquisitions. How often is there a loss of the top talent? They go out, they start their own companies, they jump ship, whatever. And so they had that talent advantage. The other thing is that they had an advantage in not production as far as getting more work done for people, but they would get higher performance out of a lesser player. So a person that may naturally be a C or a B player, it may actually perform as a B or an A player in this family, small culture setting. And we saw this with our company, and I've seen it in lots of companies, that you'll have these people that they will come in, and with the guide rails, say here at our company, we would have people that would outperform their, say, latent potential. They would if you plopped them in anywhere else, they wouldn't perform at that top level. So those 3 advantages are just inherent in that size, and that really started me down a whole nother path of research of why that is.
So there is so much there that you've said that I want to attempt to try to unpack, and I want to ask you I'll probably ask this more towards the end, but like in the 100 books in the last 2 years that you've read, which ones have been the most influential or impactful to you as it relates to culture? But first, I want to know, in your study and in your research the last 2 years, did you find, Andy, is there an optimal? So my company, for example, Moxie Pest Control in Arizona, it is October 2022 right now. Today we have 125 employees-ish, give or take. Is there an optimal size that you found that the culture is kind of the best place to be? And then also too, like one of my questions is, well, then what do you say about the Walmarts? Because I don't think anyone would say, oh my gosh, Walmart, we just looked at them as an example of like the best culture in the world. It's wonderful. but they are one of the biggest companies in the world, so they are doing something right. So what is an optimal size? I have so many questions. We'll start there.
Okay, so
what's a good size?
Yeah, and I researched your company a little bit. I had some questions for you too. So optimum size, it seems like, so if you have a huge company, it really depends on the operational unit from what I've seen. So if you had, let's say you have 100 employees, that's probably on the very high end of being able to know everyone's name, be able to have a cultural connection and identity that's shared with all those people in a really, really meaningful way. But you probably have functional units that are in a, say, 5 to 20 people range, where you have, I don't know, broken out into operational for functional units where it's like, okay, these are termite technicians and all these guys just do termites and they have a manager, and really their manager is like their little commander of their unit, and they'll identify with that. And I think we've all had those experiences where you work for a bigger company, you really work for whoever your direct boss is, your direct manager, and you'll follow that person a lot of times more than the higher up leader. It's like if you were Catholic, you don't necessarily follow the Pope necessarily, but
it's your local clergyman or
Exactly. And so I think we tend to function in that way. So you can have a bigger operation and get the benefits of that smaller, but you have to put people in place that are worthy of, that people determine are the people that are above are determined are worthy of following, of really solid people. So I think as like a person that's running a larger operation, most of your time probably is in hand picking those right people to run each branch or each functional unit or like that. So that you're making sure that culture is as densely disseminated to them, and then they can densely disseminate it to the people on the ground. Now, the Walmart question is definitely one I thought about, and I think that one of the things that the Walmart example proves is that pest control is not a commodity. So I think when people shop for something, that they don't care who it comes from, they don't care how it's done. It's, I want to have this flat screen TV. If Target has it for this price, if Amazon has it for this price, if Walmart, as long as I end up with the flat screen TV, it's not like we need service on these things. We throw them away these days. There's no TV repair, man.
Sure.
So it's a commodity. Pest control doesn't get purchased that way. In most cases, it does, but in a company that is selling on a value basis, you're not price competitive necessarily. You're not racing to the bottom to get the lowest price. I'm gonna undercut everybody for my bee and wasp service by $5, and I'll get all the business. These small to mid-sized companies that excel none of them are doing that. So they're not selling a commodity. So that the larger player, their advantages of scale don't really translate into that competitive sales environment. And also the delivery of it, you have to put boots on the ground at some point.
Sure.
And your advantages of scale are really, really limited. I mean, if you look at the P&L and my supply budget, my chemicals are 7 or 8%. Sure, if a big player can have that at 4%, great, but they're really only gaining a few percent. I still have to put a guy there. They have to put a guy there. They have to buy the same gas and trucks. And all that.
And I like, Andy, that you talk about pest control not necessarily being a commodity. There are some things I do wonder if it's becoming more that way or not. So you and I were both in the same space. We both have vehicles, and for the most part, the customer doesn't really care what vehicle shows up to their. We both have uniform costs. We both pay gas. It might be a couple cents more or a couple cents less, depending on where. So those things are the commodity, but the thing that is definitely not the commodity is the person that's going to your business or restaurant or home, and then the person that's answering the phone on the other end of the line. Those things are not created equal at all. And I think that therein lies a great opportunity for pest operators to decide who they are in the marketplace, charge more, charge less, whatever it is. Vehicles all cost about the same. Gas all cost about the same. we're all using the same product. No one has a special super secret ingredient that will take care of this pest. Like, we're all using the same stuff. And so the thing that is not the commodity is the quality of the person that is either on the phone or at the property or whatever else. So you've not been listening to the news for 2 years. So in case you didn't know, I have another question for you, but as it relates to culture, and these are mostly things that I'm struggling with that I want to lean on someone who's done a lot more reading on it the last couple of years. So remote work, right? Remote work is a thing. Quiet quitting is a thing. And how do you, so I'm not like super old, but like I turned 38 at the end of the month, but I am still of the opinion, and more over the last 2 years than ever before, that it is a good thing to have people in a place physically together so that there can be transfer of ideas and transfer of how we do things and professional and all of those sorts of things. I remember a couple of years ago, we weren't performing the way that I wanted us to be performing as it related to answering the phone. And I said to my director of operations at the time, he's basically the COO of my organization now, Travis, I said, Travis, what is going on? Why is our abandoned call rate this? And it's still something from time to time, and depending on the year that we struggle with, or the time of the year that we struggle with. So look, we're missing 10% of our calls. I just made that up. I can't remember, but we're missing 10% of our calls. Why is that? And so he went and did a lot of digging, and we found that 90% of the calls that we were missing were happening right at the very beginning of the day. And so I said, well, why is that? Do we need to hire one more or two more or 10 more? I don't care, people to be available at the very beginning of the day. And so what we found is that people, they were coming in, they were clocking in, they were using the restroom, they were going and getting the coffee, all good things. I want people to, especially my employees, to use the restroom and get coffee and do all those things. But it was sometimes at the cost of customers calling in, boom, right at 9 o'clock on the dot or when our phone's open, and missing them. And then having to have another CSR or employee, and I'm kind of getting into too many details, but like it was such a waste because then that customer had to leave a voicemail. Someone actually had to listen to the voicemail, transcribe it. Someone had to call them back. They weren't available because they were at work. And so it was just like all of this unnecessary. And so my point with that is that how, with the remote being such a big thing anymore, can you still have just a wonderful, wonderful culture? And I don't know if you're even doing remote or not.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a hybrid, but how do you still have an incredible culture with some sort of remote piece of that?
You bring up just a whole myriad of things. So yeah, remote is more difficult. You take away a lot of the human connection elements that we're just evolutionarily hardwired for. And when you do that, you're not really replacing it with something. We have all team meetings. We have some staff members that are remote, some CSRs and things like that. And they're in our all staff meetings. We have a little phone set up with each one of them on a Zoom call or a FaceTime call so that they can hear and we can see them and we can all interact as if they were there. And that's helped a lot. I don't know that there's necessarily a technological replacement yet to shaking hands, being right near someone. We tend to better empathize and emulate and adopt another person's viewpoint when we're actually in close proximity. It's just it's a physiological and psychological effect that we have. Now, I would think, just off the cuff, someone that's not answering the phone first thing in the morning, we talk about this a lot here now after we started our little cult, so that's probably an outshoot of someone not connecting meaning with what they're actually doing. So what I mean is everybody does things and they perceive things as important or not based on their values and what they perceive as meaningful. For you and I, as say an owner of a company, if the phone rings, I pick up that phone instantly because that phone call has so much more weight to me in a meaningful way. It's making payroll. It's providing health insurance for people. It's my reputation, all these things. The CSR hasn't connected. If you're having trouble with they don't want to answer the phone first thing in the morning, blah, blah, blah. It's because they don't connect what they're actually doing right now with something extraordinarily meaningful that drives them to do that. And so that's where it gets a little wild. But you asked about the books, and this is where it gets a little crazy. The two books that were the most important, of course, I've read all the Good to Great and all the standard ones, Harvard Business Review list of books, the whole thing, and all of them are good. But the two, and it's probably going to be surprising, that were the most impactful for my philosophical bent on this now was Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is about comparative mythology. Think Star Wars. It's the hero's quest. And then the other side of that was Jordan Peterson's academic work on maps of meaning. And it's about your perceptive framework for action, what drives people to find meaning in things and find value in things. And they really they end up being kind of two parts of an equation that generates your actual culture. One is on the narrative side, with Joseph Campbell's work, a story, because we all understand things by story, that you're a character in, and your employees are a character in, and your customers are a character in, and you're the hero, and you have to do this thing. The narrative, and that's got to come from the top. You've got to tell the story. And that's just something that I'm kind of an introvert naturally, and it was hard for me, but I had to start to tell stories. Like you were sitting around a campfire and go, here's the story of how this happened and why this happened, and then we emotionalize what we're actually doing. That with inductive learning, which is they see what I do, and then because I can't tell a good story and then do a bad thing, because that won't connect, and that cognitive dissonance will ruin the whole illusion. You've got to be together with that. Those connected equal a shared perceptive framework for action, and that's in Jordan Peterson's world with maps of meaning. A shared perceptive framework for action that generates meaning for people. So they see what you do, they hear the stories of why you're doing it and what's important and what's heroic and what's good. All the things we value. When you think the moral of the story, we got to have these stories where we have the moral, we know what's right. That then we will now know we're all in that same perceptive framework. I've had people that you can tell they didn't have that same perceptive framework. And so then their actions were quote unquote wrong. They did the wrong thing. They made the wrong choice. And I'm sure we've all had these employees where you're like, you're a great guy, but you just keep choosing the wrong path. You like over and over again. And it's because they're not inculcated into your little mythological cult of your company, which really that's what we're doing. We're making a shared mythological framework that needs to be living. We have to be living it, and it has to be real, because people will sense when it's not, and they'll reject it. They'll full on just completely reject it. And I'm sure we've all been there. You work at a place that says, hey, I'm in whatever, put your values on the wall, whatever they might be, and buy a ping pong table, and we have culture now. If you don't do those and then don't tell stories where your employees are the heroes of those stories, they don't own it. Once they do own it, you're in. You're done. They're on your team.
Andy, what's the story that you've told the most the last 2 years in your company as it relates to a core value or an experience? There's something that you, as the owner, there's many things that you want your people to know and understand. What's the story that you've told the most to get that point across?
The most? I have a whole bag of them. And I didn't realize that I did this. I grew up with a family that did this naturally. Our favorite thing, Thanksgiving, we all sit around and we tell stories. And we talk about the old days of this and this happened and that. One of them that I probably bring back a lot of them from old technician days when I was in the field all the time. And this happened, and they always have, it's probably annoying. If you knew what I was doing, it would probably be annoying, because you're like, oh, the old guy's telling this story that's going to have this moral. But most of the time people don't really catch on, and they just get engaged in the story. But the one that I tell the most, and it revolves around, dedication to what we're trying to build and how important I think it is, has to do with our first year in business. We came around to the fall. We're up north, so it's very seasonal. We came around to the fall, and things went really, really bad. We did not make a lot of money. So it got to be November. And November, we made $350 for our total sales for that first November. And that was really hard. I had a 1.5-year-old at home, a wife. Our church paid our mortgage for that month and brought us a bucket, like a box of food for Thanksgiving. And at that time, I had a decision point there to make, that I was applying to work at UPS as a package handler for the holidays. And I went to the interview. It was like a big group interview, and I left. I went halfway through. I thought to myself, I've worked in this industry then at that point for 12 or 13 years. We put all our chips on this company, and when we're going to do this. And I walked out and went back. And Holly, my wife, she works here in the business with me. And I said, "Hun, we're not taking that job. We can do this. I bet I'm putting all the chips on us. We can make this happen." The next month, we did $1,000. The month after that, and then off to the races we went. But that commitment to it, even through the really hard stuff, we can get through that perseverance, which is one of our core values. That's kind of the story that I tell. And so when a guy's on a roof and goes, "Geez, do I really want to, it's hot, it's 90 degrees. Do I really want to go over there and knock that nest down? Or do I really want to check that last bait station that's all the way behind the back of the warehouse?" I think that sometimes they think, "You know what? I'm going to persevere. I heard this story, and Andy did this thing. They suffered, they had, the mortgage paid for them, whatever." And that is where you bring someone's motivation really to life. And that's one of them. I have a ton that I tell, but that's the one probably most often.
How, Andy, would you describe in just a short sentence your culture at your company before 2020? How would you describe it now? And then what is the difference? Like what has happened because of that? What have the results been?
So before 2020, we always had a good culture, because just like a lot of these small companies, you don't have to do anything special to make it happen. It will just happen. And it will largely depend on the personality type of the founder, the owner, whatever. And you're working very closely with all your staff. So we had that advantage already. So our culture was good, but I didn't know why. I couldn't tell you in 2019, I couldn't say, this is what I'm doing to propagate this. This is why this is working. This is the actual fabric of it, and show you, that's it. At this point now, we've figured these things out. It's just hypercharged it. The other side effect is that we had to make changes, staffing changes, and this process
that can be painful to do.
It can, especially in a small company. It's that much more. So we had to make hard choices. And I don't think that without the clarity and crystallization of why we were going to make these changes and exactly what I wanted to see actualized in our people, I don't know if I would have made, but bit the bullet and gone, yes, we have to make this change, this change, this change. But with that, it was very evident. I got a year into this process and I went, okay, I see all the writing on the wall now. It was almost like you cleared away fog lifted, and you go, okay, yep, I can see this hill, this obstruction, and then off you go.
Wow. So you cut out news 2 years ago. You replaced that with a just voracious appetite to read. How else do you spend your time as the owner and founder of the company as it relates to business or whatever? You're not in the field anymore. You're not doing some of those things. How else do you spend your time?
So it's a lot of getting this figured out for a system moving forward to bring people in more effectively and quickly, kind of systematize the process of bringing people in and getting them inculcated into our little cult mythology here. The more I can get that together, the faster we can grow. Because like anybody, we're limited by how many technicians. I mean, as fast as I can train people and put them in a truck, we can grow. We can fill every single guy you gave me right now. But I want to make sure that we're able to do that in the absolute, best way, so that they're going out there and that we know that they're the right people. And we know that they have our culture. So really, that's the overarching focus for us right now. We're not pushing, sales and marketing and that kind of thing because we have more customers than we know what to do with. So it's really on the people side that we're spending most of our time right now.
What processes or checks in place or checks do you have in place that will tell you or tell your field manager or office manager whether you've got a culture fit in place or not, or that tells you this person's got to go, kind of as you found out a year or 2 years ago, like, hey, as I dug in more and looked at this, it became obvious to me that these people needed to graduate in some form or another.
Yeah. So you can sense the difference if there's a delta in the perceptive framework for meaning for that person and yourself. If you get attuned to it, we're all very attuned to it. Does this other person that I'm interacting with share my viewpoints or not? We already have that. So it was, I guess, refining that sense a little bit. But then the other thing that makes it a little easier, my wife's a little less cerebral with what we do and a little more like, just show me some facts, is we pulled, I think it was from Traction or something like that, EOS, with the people analyzer, where you have your core core values. Do they meet, and you rank them? Do they meet these? How much do you feel like they rank them? And I feel like that is actually sort of the same thing, and it just puts it down in an empirical metric that you can kind of add up and sort of tally up a little bit. So we've done that, and that's a telling one too. If you line all your people up and you go, okay, how much do they live up to this core value, that core value, this core value? And then we had a few other questions that we added our own little spice to that, and it was every single person that we knew we had issues. It turned up. The people analyzer system kind of showed us, yeah, you're 100% right.
Wow, how about that? So let me ask you this as we start to round this out, Andy. You're speaking to a lot of founders, mid-sized to smaller companies. What would you say to that person or that owner or operator or founder that is really struggling with culture? Their culture doesn't stink, but it's, maybe stagnant or not so great, and they want to change that. What would you point them towards? The books that you mentioned earlier? Would you, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that people need to work on is understanding themselves and their motivations and what they want. The biggest thing I run into is our staff members. I'm trying to work with them to clarify for them, what do you want in life? What are you looking for? What is it that you're trying to do? If you don't know that, everything else is just a kind of a waste of time. I think too many people spend very little time in a little bit of self-reflection and analysis of what's really motivating them. Because a lot of these things that I discovered were things that after you discover them, you turn around and look at yourself and you go, yeah, I always knew that. But bringing that into the front of your brain, the conscious part of your brain, out of that deep subconscious where you don't know what your motivations are. I don't know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. If you don't know, then you can't really relay that to somebody else, why they should be doing the things they should be doing, other than I told you so, I'm the boss. How far does that get you? Sure.
Yeah, no, not very far at all. Andy, this has been totally wonderful. I've got to have you on again. There's so much that just time doesn't allow us to be able to cover right now. If there's people that want to continue this conversation with you, how do they connect with you? Where do they find? What's the best website for them to interact with you as it relates to your business and pest control commercially in New York? How do people connect with you?
Probably the easiest thing is LinkedIn. If you search my name on LinkedIn and find me, I'll respond super quick on there. Or you can go to our website and email. That'll get to me too.
Very good.
Perimetek.com. Yep.
Perfect. Andy, thank you so much for being on. Thank you, all of you, my audience and followers, for patching in and carving time out once a week or twice a week. We're dropping these twice a week until the book launch on November 3rd in Phoenix. But until then, create a great day, and thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Multiply You podcast. You'll see us again soon when you subscribe for future episodes.